Hi, I'm Diana.
And I'm Zach.
And we are The Farrier's Bellows, a podcast dedicated to bringing you games and tools to take your adventures further.
We're going to be talking about non-traditional indie RPGs, some that have been around for years, others that are newer, to take you beyond the ordinary.
Today, join us as we raise anchor in Poisoned.
Our first segment is The Call to Adventure. Poisoned is a game by Vincent Baker that the first edition was released in 2007. I believe there was an Ashcan before that I want to say 2004, but I couldn't find a definitive date. It is a game about pirates, and pirates at their most gritty and horrifying and dirty and terrible. It is a game of violence and pain upon the pirate ship The Dagger. As the game opens, the ship's cruel captain, Brimstone Jack, has been poisoned and killed by a spy of the Royal Navy, and a Navy vessel is on its way to intercept the crew. From there, players are faced with drama and danger as they try to achieve their own personal, usually wicked, ambitions. It is a game of high seas stakes, and I don't think it's too far to say terror.
I think that's fair.
Well, we'll get into that, I think. It is a game of high seas stakes and violence, as everyone essentially tries to keep alive in a very dangerous world.
Yes. The nitty-gritty of how you play this game, how you stay alive in this dangerous world, is that the players have 6 stats. The main 4 are brutality, soul, devil, and ambition, which correspond to 4 basic moves. When one of these moves is triggered, the player rolls the appropriate stat while the GM rolls that stat's opposite. So for an example, when a player is attacking the helpless, they roll their brutality while the GM rolls their soul. So those 2 stats are kind of going against each other. Roll outcomes are determined by a versus test. So the player rolls their brutality number of D6s, and all of their 4s, 5s, and 6s are successes. Players compare their successes, and whoever has the most achieves their goal. Fights are a little different. Characters have brinkmanship, how willing the character is to commit violence and achieve their goals. And profile, how dangerous a character is with all of the weapons at their disposal. Profile determines what kind of threats you take on and whether you'll have advantage or disadvantage against them, while brinkmanship is what you roll to do harm. I hope that was clear. It's a lot. So I hope that was clear.
I think what's important there is that you have 4 basic moves for interacting with the world, and then combat, right?
Yeah.
Is its own thing, and we will talk about that a little later on.
Yeah.
So, Dinah, what are some things that you liked about this game?
So I literally just said, that was a lot, but I do really like the simplicity of it. If I'm going to try to hurt someone, I know what I'm rolling, I know what you're rolling. I know what I'm looking for, and I know what number, I don't have a specific number I'm looking for, but I know that I need more than you. It's simple, it's clear cut. There's not a whole lot of confusion there. Once I know what I'm rolling, there's not a whole lot of confusion to figure out where I'm getting my advantage from.
When you say the simplicity, are you talking about the entire game, or are you talking about the 4 basic moves? Are you talking about the fights?
I'm talking about the 4 basic moves.
Okay.
Because that for our game was a bigger chunk of the game than the fights were.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. The basic action, the basic unit of action in the game of those 4 moves is very simple. It's very straightforward, and I think it works really well. I especially like that you're rolling sort of against yourself. I really enjoy the simplicity of that. When you are going into danger, you roll your devil, the GM rolls your ambition, right? Which I think has a really nice theme to it, has a really nice symbolism to it, right? In that each of the things that you do make sense, right? The GM is testing your ambition while you test how willing you are to engage in danger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. All of the moves are really cool like that. And I appreciate that. And I like how, I don't know, how simple. Okay, when I say simple, I don't mean that it's like easy. I just mean that it's not, it feels a bit more intuitive.
Yes.
Those moves feel a bit more intuitive than some of the other ones. And so I just appreciated that.
I'll also say that it's laid out on the character sheet in a very cool way, right? You have a compass rose and then your 4 stats around the compass rose and then the moves leading into the 4 stats showing like their relationship. So it's very clear on your character sheet how those stats and those moves work.
Yes. Yes, it is. What's something that you liked?
I like the way that the GM gets things to throw at the players. So there's a section in the rulebook called Cruel Fortunes. And cruel fortunes are things that the GM can throw at the players. And you very literally kind of just like write it on an index card and you put it on the table. And then all the players know that problem is now literally and figuratively on the table. It's very fun and it feels rewarding when someone messes up badly and I get to throw in a cruel fortune and I get to like look through this list of all these different very like mechanical things and be like, okay, cool, I'm throwing that there. I'm going to hint at this cruel fortune. You guys found an island or you were on your way to an island, right? And I was able to pull in a storm.
Yes.
And kind of like put it ahead of you and the enemy ship is behind you and you had to like make a call what you were going to do. It feels sort of like a precursor to GM moves in Powered by the Apocalypse games, in that you have this very clear mechanized thing that you as a GM can do to the players in order to guide the fiction. And I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I like it. I want to engage with that mechanic a lot more.
Yeah, it was I mean, that storm ruined us a little, so, you know, it was a fun thing. It adds a nice level to the game, I think. Another level that is fun to play around with, I think. It's
something for the GM to do, really. It just gives you a toy box to play with. Some of them include, let's see, debauchery. When debauchery comes into play, the pirates fall into gluttonous orgiastic excess. Orgiastic excess. This automatically affects most or all NPC pirates. Let's see, also divine judgment, hell, the king's agents. There's just a lot of just all these great little things that have mechanical rules for how to deal with them that I can throw in.
Another thing that I liked was the bargain system in this game. And it's just a way for one player to have advantage over another player. When I make a promise to someone else, until I fulfill my promise, they have the ability to essentially screw with me by taking away some dice from me. And I will always owe that to them until they cash it in. And so it's just a fun way to potentially ruin someone's life. But what's fun about it is that you start the game with a bargain, much like Bonds. And it adds that flavor to the character development and why you're all together and the history that you have. But it also makes it less awkward when you try to ruin someone's life later by using it. And so I just really enjoyed it. And I thought that was a fun thing about this game that really added to the level of being pirates. Because we're all connected one way or another and we have to rely on each other. And this adds a level of why we have to rely on each other.
Yes. It generates party conflict, which is what I think that this game is intended to do and probably does very well. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But I really love that you start with what are called outstanding bargains, which is everybody goes around and they pick a bargain from a list that, like you said, somebody has in a way that's very reminiscent of Bonds. But it's also an ongoing mechanic. When you make a promise in-game, somebody can be like, oh, are you striking a bargain? And it works really well, especially if you have players that are that have conflicting ambitions or goals and are kind of after each other. It is rife for fostering that discontent.
Anything else you liked?
So one of the things that this game includes a lot of is lists. You are building everything based on a list of available options. And it's a really clear guideline for how things work in this setting, how things work in this world. So like we said, with the outstanding bargains, there's a clear list of 7 or 8 bargains that you can start with. The way that you determine your character's stats is not by point buy or by just sort of by like, you don't have like a predetermined list of stats, right? You have lists of sins that you've committed and lists of violence that you've suffered. And you get to choose from that list what things your character has committed, what things that they've suffered, and that's what determines your stat. And I love that because it is, it's mechanically helpful. It builds up your mechanic, but it's doing it in a way that is very narrative and allows you to discover your character in play. But a character with 2 brutality who has suffered attempted murder and imprisonment is very different than a character with 2 brutality who has suffered a cursing and arrest, right? Mm-hmm. Those are 2 very different characters, even though they have the same stats. And I think that helps build your character in a really cool, interesting way.
I agree wholeheartedly. That's something that I really liked about this game as well, is that you get to pick your sins and you get to pick how you have suffered violence. So you are building this character out from the get-go. From the very beginning, you are figuring out what kind of pirate they are. I really like how from the very beginning, it sets you up. You are a pirate. You have done some stuff. You've done some stuff. Like, you're not this like wonderful, wholesome person who's never committed anything wrong, who's never done anything wrong and has lived this perfect life and decided to become a pirate. Like, no, you have done some stuff and you have had some stuff done to you. This is why you're a pirate. And I think it just adds a really nice grittiness to the game. Like, you don't get to be the runaway heiress who's had a perfect life and this is her one big dangerous movement. Like, no, horrible things have happened to you and you yourself have done horrible things. And it really puts you in the mind of a pirate and what it would have been like to be a pirate. And it's just really interesting.
It works very hard to have a very cohesive tone, right? In the ways that you just described. It doesn't want you to be high adventure hero. It wants you to be gross, low level pirate. The game works very hard to do that.
The game does work very hard to do that.
I have a hunch that I would like to test in the future, but the game works best when you do that. But also, our group didn't do that.
Our group kind of did that, but we were very kind to one another. We worked very well as a ship.
Yes.
We didn't work very well as pirates, but we worked very well as a ship.
Yeah. So let's just talk about it now, because I want to talk about it now. Y'all didn't fight each other at all, no matter how hard I tried, no matter what I threw at you, no matter how ornery and obnoxious I made your crew. I could not get y'all as players to disagree or to fight one another.
Right.
Y'all were very cohesive. Y'all were very good at problem solving.
Yeah, it's because I'm a great captain.
Y'all, well, and that
I was the captain, and I was wonderful.
And no one disagreed. Everybody was just like, nobody wanted to be captain, which was interesting.
I was the only one, yeah.
And then once you became captain, everybody was behind you. Mm-hmm. And
it's because I was amazing.
Gosh, golly darn, if I couldn't get anyone to try to assassinate you.
No one was having
no matter what I offered people.
Yeah, it's because I was wonderful.
So it became a very interesting game because it was not what I was expecting from reading Poisoned, from reading about Poisoned. I had not been expecting y'all to gather together as a crew and work together to solve the problems.
I think it helped that the mix of bargains and ambitions that we had, and I don't know if it was done intentionally. I know it wasn't done intentionally on my part, but the mix that we had made it so we had a bigger desire to help each other than we did to not. Right? Like, there weren't two people who wanted to be captain. I wanted to be captain. And when I became captain, I then had the means, because of some of the other ambitions that I had, to help somebody else reach their ambitions. Or I had a certain bargain with somebody that helped them do something. Like, our interconnectedness helped us want to work together as opposed to pitting us against each other.
Yeah.
Like, if anybody had had another ambition that, like, maybe we wanted to sleep with the same person, or maybe we both wanted to be captain, then it would have added to the conflict. But unintentionally, we all picked things that helped each other.
And so I think my question there is, do you think that that was a problem?
I don't think it was a problem, but I don't think we really played poisoned. Like, really played poisoned.
That's the question that I'm left with, because it actually worked quite well. It was still a very fun game, and it's one that I would absolutely play again. I think I would still have a lot of fun playing with a fairly well put together, well organized crew that gets along and has cohesive goals, just trying to survive. Because I, as the GM, or whoever is the GM, has enough cruel fortunes and problems that they can throw in your way that there's still plenty to do and plenty to explore if you are a cohesive crew.
Right.
My question is, would I get more out of the game if y'all were trying to constantly kill each other?
I also wonder if we had played a longer campaign, if it would have naturally gone that way.
Naturally,
we just slowly would have started hating each other because we're stuck on the ship, and now I don't want to be anywhere near you and I want to murder you. You know, like, I wonder if the game would have naturally done that. I worry we played with two nice people and it never would have gone that way.
That's entirely possible. I think I like that about the game. I think that even though, for all I can tell from the rules, it is really trying to push you towards inter-party conflict. Even though our game had no inter-party conflict, the game still worked quite well, and it was still quite fun, and there was still plenty to do. I like that it has that versatility, that even though this game is presented as very, very dark, you don't necessarily have to play it as dark as it's written.
Yeah.
And you know me, I love tone cohesion, and I love playing by the rules. That is sort of my shit.
This is the first time I've ever heard that.
But this still worked really well for what it was. Yeah. And I would do Poisoned with a slightly less serious tone again.
Yeah. It was fun. I genuinely had fun. But something that I had questions about was, we had to keep going back to the rules to clarify things, because the rules were kind of hard to get through and to understand. And it's typical of games that were written around the same time, like 2007, that the rules are a little bit harder to get through. And when you think about it, it makes sense, because they're trailblazing, right? They're doing this for the first time. So now game makers have an advantage. They can just say something and it's understood that we'd understand what that is. But back then, you didn't, and you had to explain things a lot more.
No spoilers for our Troll Babes episode.
No spoilers for our Troll Babes episode. But that all said, the rules were kind of hard to get through, I think, for us. So I don't know if there's an easier way to either explain the rules to new players, because there was a lot of stopping and like, what does that mean? And how do we do this? And I just don't know if there's an easier way of conveying this game, because there's a lot to this game. It is a fun game, and individual parts of it are easy and simple, but when you put it all together, it's sort of complex.
At 32 pages, a 32-page PDF, we found ourselves turning and looking for answers a lot.
Yeah.
We also found that there is one very important rule that is only mentioned once in the middle of a paragraph that I had totally missed, which, when we missed it, made the GM much more powerful than they should have been.
Yeah.
There is some difficulty. I had some difficulty with this rule book. There are a lot of moving parts, especially once you get into combat and brinksmanship and profiles and team combat. Just all of these different things that are pretty rough to deal with at the table. And I think the more we play this game, the easier that will get. But for our first session, we had some difficulty with rule comprehension.
So Zach, is there anything that stood out to you?
One of the things that I really liked is characters gain a currency called X's. And over the course of play, they're gathering these X's, and these X's are used for fights. All narrative should eventually be leading towards a fight in Poisoned. And what you use X's for is really cool. For instance, if a fight is about to break out, I can spend 3 X's to automatically kill the NPC, no questions asked. And I think that happened in our game.
I think we killed the captain of the other ship.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yep.
It is just this great bit of player control that they can just automatically kill somebody if they want to. It really allows and encourages the GM to play fast and loose with characters and not like there's no big bad. Mm-hmm. You can't make a big bad because the players could just kill them whenever they want. It's not about this crew facing off against a big bad. It's about a band of ruffians dealing with whatever comes up against them. So all threats are temporary. All threats need to be temporary. You can also use them for a myriad of other really cool things that I think we want to talk about in the next section. We do this so much.
Well, it's kind of hard to especially since our next section is what is the overall theme of the game. It's kind of hard to not talk about that while you're talking about the bits of the game that you liked.
Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to say about X's?
The X's are a physical manifestation of your advantage, right? Of the advantages that you had won through rolls.
Yeah.
So they're not just randomly handed out. You earned this advantage. It's just coming into play when you're fighting. And I just think that is a really interesting way of getting that advantage that you can use to murder the captain of the other ship, right? I worked really hard to be able to murder that captain by, rolling really well 3 other times, or however many other times. And I just it adds a nice layer to our cake of play. That was a weird analogy that I went with, but that's what I did. It just adds this nice layer of storytelling. You're not just randomly getting this. You don't just get it. You worked for it. You worked for that advantage. You put in the time. You put in the rolls. And, you got those failures. And you tried this so many times. And that's what gave you that little bit of an edge. Which I just find that very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything leads to a fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we move on, the last thing that I really liked that I forgot previously is ship and company creation. And what I really like about when as a group you're making your ship and you're making the rest of your pirate crew is that you have these lists of things that build up your ship and your crew, and they are not mechanical in any way. They are purely thematic. So for the ship, some of the examples are it's fast, it's frightening to see, it has a grim reputation, and it's lucky. And none of those change the ship's profile. None of those change how powerful the ship is.
Right.
They just become things that you can refer to in the narrative. The same happens with the company. Your company always has the same profile, but you can determine whether or not they've served together for many years, or it's well armed and eager to fight, or it has been badly mistreated. And we did some really cool stuff with that. We had some actually pretty cool role play scenes in this. I think because one of the things we chose was that the ship doesn't have a strong common language. So everybody spoke different languages, and we had to work around that when we were giving orders or electing a new captain and all this other stuff. And it became this very cool thematic thing that had no mechanical bearing, but nevertheless was a lot of fun and really engaging.
I do just want to point out that when we talked about that as a table, I very specifically brought up the I Love Lucy skit, and I think there was only one other person at the table who got it.
I still don't know what you're talking about.
It makes me so sad that you don't know what I'm talking about. I Love Lucy, she's in jail, and then Ricky has to translate into English. They're in jail in Germany. Okay. Ricky has to translate in English from Spanish. Then they find someone who speaks Spanish and French, and then they have to find someone who speaks French and German. I believe that's the languages. And so it's just this train from the German office. I believe it's German. Don't quote me on this. I believe it's a German-speaking, only German officer translating to the French and German person, who then translates to the French and Spanish person, who then translates from the Spanish and English person, who then translates to the only English person, Lucy. And it's hilarious because they translate sounds like, just like goes down the line, and it's really funny. And that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, other than I brought this up at the table and no one knew what I was talking about.
I'm sorry.
You should all watch I Love Lucy. There are a lot of seasons.
I don't think we need to do an ad for I Love Lucy. I think I Love Lucy's doing fine.
I think so. Let's approach the Innermost cave.
So what I wanted to talk about this week for this episode was how Poisoned deals with violence and the effect of violence on character growth and personalities. Because I think that's what this game is really most about. It's not really a historical fiction game because it doesn't really care how historically accurate your pirates are as long as they are gritty and dark.
Right.
And that gritty and darkness leads into violence.
It doesn't even just lead into violence. That gritty and darkness is born from violence as well.
Violence is not obviously a new idea in RPGs, right? It's basically been in mainstream RPGs. It has sort of always been the core driving action, right?
Yes.
That's debatable, but you know what I mean. Dungeons and Dragons is about going into dungeons and killing things. Like, that's what Dungeons and Dragons is about.
Yeah.
And that's a very common thing for RPGs to be about.
Yeah. Well, as someone, I was looking for games when I was doing role-playing groups as part of my job. I was looking for games that didn't focus on violence, and it was very hard to find games that were appropriate for middle schoolers that focused on social interaction and did not force them to kill things. Like, it was like, it's fine if it's a part of the game, but it's something I can choose to do. Mm-hmm. It was hard to find games that it wasn't a main component of the game.
What I think is interesting about Poisoned, that sets Poisoned apart from other games that deal with violence, is that not only is violence a core component of the game, but it says violence is a core component of this game and it's going to change you. In Dungeons and Dragons, the way violence changes you is you get more XP and you become more powerful.
Right.
In Poisoned, you cut someone's eye out and then you discover that your brutality has gone, or no, I guess you're devil. You become more devilish, and then your soul decreases and you have to question who you are then.
Yeah.
Or someone cuts off your hand and your brutality increases, which, now that I think about it, is a bit problematic, but it is definitely, it's saying something, right? It is saying that violence has real effects on your character. And I think that's what's interesting. A, I think that's interesting. B, I think we're starting to see a theme in some of Vincent Baker's games between Poisoned, or at least I should not say that. I should say his games from this period, I should say, because I definitely think the recent stuff that has come out from Vincent and McGay Baker is very different than the stuff that we saw from early 2000s.
Yes.
Mid 2000s. But it is about like violence and what violence does, the same way that Dogs in the Vineyard is about violence and what violence does. And we see this also in Apocalypse World, right? Maybe less so. I think Apocalypse World is more about dealing with people socially in a lot of ways, but violence is very brutal and violence has a real effect on you. It's not inconsequential in the same way that violence is often inconsequential in games like Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And what I think is interesting about this, or how I think that the game does it, is it makes sure that violence is forefronted, right? The rules repeat several times that it will always come to a fight. That is a GM agenda. That is what the GM is supposed to always be gearing the narrative towards. No matter what is going on, a fight is on the horizon, and the pirates are going to fight because that's in their nature. It's a GM agenda and a guiding force, right? So as a GM, I'm constantly trying to push towards a fight in ways that I found a little difficult with our game, particularly because you guys were working together so well. I had some difficulty with that, but it was still something that was at the forefront of my mind, something that I knew this story that this story wanted, right? Once you get to violence, combat is the meat of this game. There are thorough, and I might even say complex, rules determining what size of a force players can contend with, utilizing the stats of brinksmanship and profile. Brinksmanship being, like you said earlier, the willingness to commit violence, and profile being the capacity to commit violence. So we see this relationship when a player is willing and capable versus a force that is willing and capable, right? Mm-hmm. And the more capable you are, the higher your profile, the more of an advantage you get mechanically. To the point that if your difference is 4 or more, it's basically suicide. You can't do anything, which feels very similar to might in Torchbearer or scale in Troll Babes. Mm-hmm. That at a certain point you just can't do anything. You have to rely on your crew, or you need to rely on more resources. You have to do something to bump up that capability. Combat itself is kind of straightforward, right? You have similar to Dogs in the Vineyard, you have this progressing scale of how much you want to escalate violence, right? In every combat, there are 3 levels to the combat, starting with basically you stop them from doing what you don't want them to do, and ending with you kill them, essentially, with some nuance depending on what you're using in the fight. And if you're losing, you can always escalate to the next level until you get to the final level at which you are risking your own life in order to try to kill them. And basically every combat runs that way, right? Mm-hmm. And it's this interesting slowed down cinematic event where you are asking, what are you willing to risk to hurt someone and get your way? In a way that doesn't feel inconsequential the way that other games might, right?
Right.
In Dungeons & Dragons, if I want to cut someone in half with a scimitar, I roll a d20 and I either do it or I don't do it. In Poisoned, I say I want to cut this guy with a scimitar, and then as the GM, you ask, all right, well, how badly do you want to do that? And how much do you want to do this? Are you willing to risk getting cut or wounded or disfigured yourself? In a way that I found very powerful and interesting.
Like in Dungeons & Dragons, if you roll poorly, something bad can happen to you. Like, something bad can happen to you in all of these scenarios, but it adds that level of intensity. Like, I'm making this conscious choice. It feels different. In Dungeons & Dragons, I'm just, like roll a dice or whatever, and whatever happens, happens. But here, I'm making the choice. I am choosing. And it's silly, and it's a small distinction, but it's a big distinction when you're playing. Mm-hmm. When you're playing, it has a heavier weight to it than when, you're rolling dice regardless. But that language shift, I think, adds a weight to it that's very interesting in play.
Absolutely. It increases the bleed, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're thinking about what it actually means to do violence to someone.
Right.
I would say the problem with this is that Poisoned seems to revel in its violence, and doesn't ask you to think too critically of it because it's what you're constantly doing and it's what it's asking you to do. So even though it is not looking at it, I think, so critically that it is asking you not to do it, right? Which is what other games look at violence do. I would think, like we talked, long-term play of Dogs in the Vineyard is that it eventually is asking you to stop. Poisoned might be as well, right? The only way to beat Poisoned might be not to play. Mm-hmm. But I do think that you are intending to engage with this violence in a way that should be entertaining but not fun.
Yes.
In a way that I think we've seen a lot of these cool, interesting games do.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think what is, as we said before, what is most important in that is that this is how your character grows and changes, right? Your stats change when you suffer violence, when you commit violence, when you get wounds, or by engaging your ambition, usually through violence. That's how your character advances, not through XP, not through other mechanical changes. Mm-hmm. It's purely through the narrative of what bad thing happens to your character or happens because of your character, that your character grows and changes. Along those same lines, I wonder what would happen if we cut out or left behind some of the game's more contentious elements, some of the game's more edgy, violent elements, I know was a turnoff to some of our players, and I have very mixed feelings about their inclusion in general. On the one hand, so for example, one of the possible sins that you can choose from in the list that you have either committed or had committed against you is rape. And I get why it's there from a narrative standpoint, from a quote-unquote historical standpoint. I understand why it's there. I just don't know if I need it as a mechanized piece as we enter the game.
Yeah.
There's a couple little things like that where I get that the game is trying to go for this gritty realism, this intense look at violence, but I wonder if things like that, it's also sort of, it's not said in the game, but the only time it mentions playing a woman character is if you are playing a woman disguised as a man.
Correct.
Which, again, I don't know if we need that sort of inclusion in order to get the full experience of what this game is saying about violence. Those are things that I would be very comfortable with leaving behind. I'd be comfortable with leaving behind rape as a sin that you can choose to engage with mechanically. I think that, I don't know. As well as some of the other sort of darker things.
Overall, this is a game you have to be careful who you play with. But if you're going to include things like rape, you have to especially be careful who you play with.
And we also played with all of our safety rules on the table. X card, lines and veils, open table, all that stuff. We made sure that was all on the table. And we were like very clear that before we even started playing, before we started character creation, we're like, hey, this is the list of things. If there's anything on this list that makes you uncomfortable, we can choose not to engage with it.
Yes. Yeah, and that's kind of the only way to play this game is to have those safety conversations in the beginning. But I bring up that you have to be careful who you play with because rape is one of those things that some groups of people think is okay to play with, right? Mm-hmm. But once you start playing with it, it can devolve into scary and uncomfortable and traumatizing very, very quickly. So I'm always okay with taking it off the table.
Yeah.
Just because it has a lot of emotional, real baggage that kind of hovers around everyone all the time in a way that I don't think some of the other sins do. That's my personal thing about that very specific example.
Yeah, it's just there's some things that this game is including as mechanized elements that I just feel could be left out as we move forward and we think about like what we actually want available in our games and what we want to say about our games, that even when we're getting pretty dark, I think it gets in the way of exploring darkness more than it allows us to explore darkness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I legitimately felt like having that in the character creation got in the way of us being able to get as dark as we wanted, because it felt like, oh, wait, no, I didn't want to go that... Right?
I feel like if you were going to play with it...
It put us on edge.
Yes. Well, yes. But I feel like if you were going to play with it, the minute you tried to bring that element in, if you're the type of person that we play with, and I can't imagine I just can't imagine that this wouldn't happen. Maybe it would, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't. The minute that you go to put it into play, you would immediately be taken out of the game because you would be thinking about the reaction that the other people on the table would have to you introducing this to your play.
Yeah.
Which I didn't feel that way about adultery. I didn't feel that way about murder, but I would have felt that way about rape.
Yes.
If I was going to introduce this to my play, I wouldn't be worried about what Nathan, the captain, would be thinking. I would be worried about what Zach, the player, is thinking, and it would take me out of the game.
Yes, agreed. So I would just wonder if we could take that out.
Yeah,
would be.
I wonder what would happen.
Kind of, yeah. I wonder if we would have more room to explore the violence if we got rid of some of the things that felt explicitly dark and edgy.
Yeah,
you know. Diana, what do you think about the new player friendliness of this after we just finished talking about how insanely dark this game allows you to be?
So it is very dark. And it is very roleplay heavy, and you have to feel safe and comfortable while playing this game. So all of that has to be true before even like contemplating whether or not this is a game that's appropriate for someone who's never played games before. But if you are new to GMing or old to GMing or whatever, however you want to phrase it, and you want to introduce gaming to somebody new, I do think that you can use this game. I think, though, that for your new player to get the most out of this game, they should have some gameplay experience under the belt or improv experience, because you do have to roleplay as you do in role-playing games. You do have to roleplay in this game. There aren't a ton of stats to keep track of, and keeping track of them is pretty straightforward. That aspect of it, like the crunchiness of this, I think can be new player friendly, right? Like I think you can introduce this to a new player, but the tone of this game and the direction that it can lead to is very dark, and you have to be comfortable as a player, as an improv person, as a member of this table. You have to be comfortable with how to navigate the play when you are in control of the wheel. And I think that's something you get with experience. That all said, if you'd played 1 or 2 games before this, I think you could play this game pretty easily. I think we played this game with someone who had only ever played one other Farriers game with us. Or 2.
Yes.
1 or 2 Farriers games with us.
Yes. Yeah. We played with one person who had only played one other role-playing game ever.
They did very well.
Yeah, they did fantastic.
So I think a little bit of that experience, just something to draw on, something to know that not all role-playing games are this dark and like hard, emotionally.
But then, like you said, we did not have a very dark game.
No.
We had a very cooperative game where a crew of pirates who still led a rough and tumble life dealt with external issues and faced them head on. And it was still dark, and it was still violent, and it was still gritty. But this game definitely has a reputation for how dark it can get. And we did not see that and still had a lot of fun with it.
Yes. And that's why I don't want you to shy away from this game if you've got some new players and you really want to play this game. I don't think you should shy away from it. I think you need to go into it with open eyes, though.
Yeah. Well, I think a blanket statement for all games that we recommend is that you play with safety tools.
Oh, absolutely.
And you are aware of safety tools, and you're familiar with safety tools, and you're playing with different ones based on your group and based on the game, I think is just a blanket always statement. But especially for a game that includes these kinds of things in a mechanized way, you want to be aware.
We're ready to return with the Elixir.
This is our segment in which we talk about things, other media that touches on the same sort of ideas or issues or can be used for inspiration. So,
He's laughing because he just read my notes. So I think that Pirates of the Caribbean touches on this, one, because it's pirates, but more specifically, there's a part of Pirates of the Caribbean, which I can't remember if it's a deleted scene or not, where it becomes clear that Captain Jack Sparrow is on the outs with the British guy who's hunting him. I forget. I haven't watched these movies in a very long time. Because Captain Jack Sparrow would not deliver a ship of slaves. And I think that very specific scene, deleted scene, segment, whatever, storyline, I think that is lighthearted but serious. Like, I think it's a draw for Poisoned, right? Like, it's a show. It's a way to show that this pirate is complex and has mores, despite like some of the other violent. I say violence, very air quotes. This is a Disney movie that has been shown for him, right? Like, this is a complex character, just like you in Poisoned are a complex character.
Yeah. It's also a good example of dealing with R-rated material in a PG-13 way.
Yep. It was a very good example of veils.
Yeah.
It was veiled.
Right.
It wasn't a line, it was veiled. And it was a really interesting way of showing that. Or I keep saying interesting. I need to diversify my language. It was an accurate way of showing veils. Because they never said it. They never said slaves.
It was just implied. I actually started laughing because I saw your second one. And I think that
This might be the third time I've written down The Departed.
You need to see more movies.
I do need to see more
Watch
movies.
more movies.
No, I refuse. I bring up The Departed only because that movie is all about the violence that has been done to you and the violence that you choose to partake in. Every character in that movie has had violence done to them and is choosing to either do the same violence or do different violence or not do violence.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I wrote it down. Because I couldn't think of another example.
Well,
here's the thing. I could think of like famous psychological vignettes, but that would be boring.
Well, that has me... See, my big problem here was I was trying to think of like historical gritty things.
Yeah.
And I'd already dropped Valhalla Rising, so I didn't want to go with Valhalla Rising, although Valhalla Rising is very good and very appropriate for this. I also want to think of something that has to do with... Damn, The Departed's very good.
Yeah, I know.
Because one of the reasons that The Departed is very good is because you're dealing with a crew as well, and you're dealing with the conflict within the crew.
Yep.
Now I'm trying to think of something...
Yeah, I'm really good at picking out movies. It's the same like 4 movies, but I'm really good at picking them out.
Darn. One of mine is Black Sails, which was a Starz show about the messy lives of pirates, and came to us highly recommended and was very good for both audio inspiration. It used the Black Sails soundtrack as well as visual inspiration to help us kind of visualize the space. I would also like to recommend The Sea Rover's Practice, Pirate Tactics and Techniques, 1630 to 1730 by Bennerson Little. Poisoned contains a small section in the back called Things That Might Be True About Pirates, and it's like 3 pages long. The Sea Rover's Practice is a good 250 pages of really, really interesting insights into the actual history of piracy during the golden age of sail. It deals with the different types of ships that they used, the different types of jobs that pirates actually did, like what life was actually like on the sea and what they were actually doing. It has boarding strategies. It's a very good and thorough look at piracy, and really helped inform my understanding of how things looked and how things were done in our game of Poisoned.
Do you want to tell our listeners why you have that book?
I have that book because I took an undergrad course on pirates that I specifically took because it had a roleplay element to the class.
So what kind of story would you want to tell? Now that we've got some movies, some like really great movies like The Departed and Pirates of the Caribbean to pull from, and we've kind of gone through the game and the theme and stuff, what is a story that you'd like to tell?
There's a lot of things that I would like to do with this game. First of all, I would like to play a longer game. I'd like to do a short campaign of Poisoned. I think that it would really sing at like 4 sessions, I think.
I agree.
I get the impression. We've only played a one-shot of it, and I feel like I need more. We actually put off recording this episode because I really felt like I needed more, and we just weren't able to get it in the schedule. So I want to play a campaign of a couple sessions because I think that's where you would really get the beauty of this game. The other thing that I would like is that I was really disappointed that we had such an amiable crew. Yeah. Our crew got along so well and they were so invested in making sure each other succeeded. And I was like, A, boring. B, that means I have to do a lot of work. I just want to make y'all fight each other. We were still able to get in really good conflict, but most of it was external. I want to have a game where y'all are at each other's throats next time.
I agree. I 100% agree. I think it'd be very interesting to have to play a character that sleeps with one eye open on the ship. I just think that would be really interesting.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I love Apocalypse World so much, is because in Apocalypse World, you always end up getting, even in groups that are working together, you have differences of opinion in ways that start to become deadly in some way. And I can see that in Poisoned, and we just didn't get it, and I want it.
Any other stories you'd like to tell?
I'd like to go real hard fantasy.
Oh, man after my own heart. I want to battle a dragon, the Leviathan, and all that jazz.
Right, I think it'd be fun. One of my favorite shows as a kid was The Pirates of Darkwater, which was about a group of pirates traveling. Crap, I can't remember what the planet was called. But basically this water planet trying to collect the gems of dark water.
That says a lot about you, I think.
It was really good. In my memory, it was really good. It's probably terrible. But yeah, I think going hard fantasy would be interesting.
Yeah.
Seeing how that went.
Agreed.
Because it's not like the game is super insistent on staying true to life.
Mm-hmm.
I think it mostly seems to stay in the realm of the real because the real world is so dark and dangerous. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't go like Game of Thrones style and this is just as dark and dangerous, but also
dragons.
They're dragons.
Yeah, I'm down with that. Always down with that.
The Fairies Bellows is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. You can find us on our website at gauntlet-rpg.com, and we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet, where you can contribute to The Gauntlet and support more great shows like ours. Also, make sure to check out the Gauntlet forums at forums.gauntlet-rpg.com, where we can chat about RPGs. We have a thread for every episode, so we would love to talk to you about what you think of the show over there.
We want to send a special thank you to our editor, Zach B. You can also find us on iTunes, and you should find us on iTunes. Please rate and subscribe to us there. We would really, really appreciate it.
Follow us on Twitter at Fairies Bellows. Talk to us and talk about us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show and on the game. You can also find me on Twitter at ZWGarth.
And me at ICDiana. Until next time, you cannot dream yourself into a character. You must hammer and forge yourself one.
Remember to always pay the devil his due.